theme of age is constantly emerging today. Could both of you talk a little bit about the kinds of skills that you see are taken up most at the different age ranges that you work at? Um, I mean, if you could talk about yours and yours, we could have a comparative perspective there. And what gets harder to teach either in adolescence or beyond, and what's harder to teach younger kids as well? Or the development is harder at that age?
I think I'll go back to your presentation, Akanksha, in the morning where you said there's an overlapping of skills, there's an interrelatedness, the skills are complex. So the way we see it is not as a categorization that a certain set of skills are built at a certain age and then a new set of skills are built at a further age. What we see is the complexity of skills that you develop goes up. So for example, taking initiative for an 8-year-old might look like, putting up the hand and saying, I have a question. But taking initiative for a 13-year-old could look like coming early to class and getting the classroom ready. Right? So it's the complexity of the skill that keeps going up as you grow older. It's not so much that you'll start learning different set of skills. I mean, which might in certain cases be true if you're looking at employment skills where you're probably talking about leadership. Even if you look at just interaction or collaboration, you might give them different words. But interaction for a 6-year-old looks just about going up and saying hello to a peer in the classroom. But interaction for a 17-year-old could look very different about doing a project together in the community. Right? So it's the complexity of the skill that goes up. So that's how we see skill development happening. And again, going back to the understanding of that, this is lifelong learning. Right? What that means is that we practice and develop a set of skills as new life experiences happen to us. Again, when you go back to looking at skills as interrelated, a young person who's got the skill to collaborate cannot necessarily collaborate if they don't know how to solve problems, or if they're not creative, or if they're not critical thinkers. So I don't necessarily need to develop a whole gamut of skills. I need to, as Tara also said in the morning in a response to a question, create a space where they become a self-learner.
So I agree with Vishal, actually. I think it's a complex process, and I don't think there's any simple answer. But in the course of our work, I think 2 or 3 things we've noticed. One is that, at a very young age, you're not telling kids that you're building these skills. What you're doing is basically seeding language and strategies. So if anxiety is a problem, and we know it is, then to tell somebody and teach them breathing strategies to calm themselves down is important. For children to recognize and label emotions is important, right? So I think really what you're doing at that age is providing simple language and strategies that children can relate to. And I think what you're also doing, and at least what we do through Sesame, is provide them with role models that they can relate to, that they believe in, that are their friends. And that becomes a safe space for them to interact with these Muppets and learn from them, to be like them. What doesn't work for us in Sesame is also the fact that irrespective of how much input you give a child, unless the input is being replicated in their home or school environment as well, it becomes problematic. So I think a deep societal level change can only happen when a new generation grows up believing that change is possible.
What are some of the challenges you face in trying to teach these skills to kids and to adolescents and adults in terms of the kinds of interventions you need? Yeah.
Sure.
And
I can talk about it. I have tons of challenges.
The message of, okay, I want to go and teach these skills. What should I do? What should I not do?
I think the big challenge we face is that early childhood itself is a space that is very nascent. Till the MDGs existed, it didn't exist. And just because now it's reflecting in the SDGs, suddenly people are kind of waking up and looking at it. We are well into the SDGs, and we still don't see enough emphasis either from the private sector or the public sector or the civil sector to really look at this very critical age period. So I think that really just the ecosystem, and from policy level, that's the big challenge that we see. I think the second challenge is, creating the demand and the awareness, but really not having the supply. So I think very often there is, we set up expectations, but there's no, the supply side doesn't add. And that's a little bit of a challenge, but not much we can do about it, except, advocate and, call for better governance, I guess. I think the third thing, the big challenge we face is that through our materials and our pedagogy and our content, we promote a certain set of core intrinsic soft skills and value systems, right? But that is not carried forward when they go into their primary formal school systems.
I think at the core of it, when you talk about a mindset challenge, one is the question of that recognizing that the world is changing at a much faster pace now than ever before. The world has always been changing, so we can always argue that even 100 years back, the world was changing. But the pace of change in the world now is increasingly frantic. If I look at my parents' generation, they probably saw 2 or 3 big changes that impacted their life. In my generation alone, I have experienced at least 3 or 4 already, which have impacted my life fundamentally, really shifted who I am and how I think about myself and the world around me. The children who are coming into the world now and growing up as adults, they're probably going to see 6 to 7 massive changes, which means we definitely need to have our kids prepared to respond to those changes. So one is around the mindset around that. And our education system is not necessarily geared up to even understand this massive pace of change or be able to address it, leave alone even understanding adversity. I mean, adversity was not even in the language 2-3 years back. Right? Today it's really heartening to see that most of the presentations that we've heard since morning have spoken about adversity and its impact in development. Second is, I think, really the challenge around the mindset shift around the purpose of education. The purpose of education is not for kids to become better readers and writers or better at numeracy. The purpose of education and why we got education is so that we could give back to society and we could support societies and communities. We could support ourselves, our families, our communities, and planet. So how do we shift the conversation from education, say, for jobs, or education for the sake of better economic results, to education for a thriving individual leading to a thriving family, leading to a thriving community, leading to a thriving planet? How do we shift that conversation from happening? Right? How do we shift conversations with parents, with educators, with school leaders, with young people? Again, when you're talking about life skills or social emotional learning skills, it's not just about giving them skills so they have a better life, but how do they change the narrative, change the mindset from I have a better life now, how do I take that back into my communities? Now that's where the real change will happen. It will not happen by a dream or a Sesame Street. The real change will happen when communities like this, young people like this, take on that change and start creating behavioral change there, start changing education paradigms, learning paradigms in their communities. And I have many stories like that, but at the core of it, the challenge is, we're all sitting here recognizing that education is not working, but when you go back, we still want to just talk about numeracy literacy. Why do we not shift the conversation to talk about the real purpose of education, which is to build more kinder individuals and humans?
Both the organizations, Sesame Street and Dream a Dream, have been focusing a lot on research as well, in trying to measure 21st century skills or life skills. And if you could just very quickly tell us about what efforts have been made. You said over 1,000 publications are available on Sesame Street. How do you go about thinking about it, and when does the assessment piece come in, or when does the research piece come in?
Okay, so very quickly, to tell you honestly, though we do measure it and we use a plethora of different tools, I don't think it's as robust and as rigorous as we would like it. I think the more robust and the rigorous assessments are really in the more cognitive, measurable domain areas. The pro-social area and the executive functioning area, skills like measuring resiliency, etc., are very new. I think there are some tools and instruments out there. We are looking forward to actually pouring through what you guys have and seeing if we can find partners to collaboratively look at how these can be utilized maybe in the early years, and seeing if we can actually help develop some of those modalities.
My answer is yeah. So this is 8 years of work where we developed something called a life skills assessment scale. This measures 5 life skills, single page, observation-based scale. It's peer-reviewed, published, standardized. It's been used in 26 countries now. There are nearly 10-15 organizations in India using it. We're using this scale to measure intermediate and longitudinal outcomes of developing life skills. Again, keeping in mind that we have to be able to measure life skills. We have to be able to measure life skills with people who don't necessarily have high levels of research capability, and we have to be able to do it at scale. So it's possible. The shift we have to make in assessments is move away from a thinking of standardized testing to actually looking at formative assessments. Formative assessments. So this scale, for example, helps us relook at our program design and curriculum and content, helps us be able to map each child where they are at and how do we shift the delta for them. It helps us report back, it helps us build correlations, it helps us look at which community is faring better, which is not. It helps us look at gender correlations, age appropriate correlations. So, and there is more research that's possible just using this scale that we are now embarking on.
I think we also need to have a mind shift around that all good research doesn't have to be a randomized controlled trial. I think the bane of education research today is we are stuck with it. So I really wanted to just make that point because it's difficult to do in our city with this kind of stuff.
Say, I think as organizations here, the rhetoric and the focus is age bands for children, except the delivery points are adults who in many cases are people born from the same backgrounds, born into same adversity, and therefore, going back to the research we were introduced to earlier in the day, neuroplasticity, saying that, well, the returns to effort made towards building some of these socio-emotional skills, reduces. The effort is more and the gain you gain is less. And if you are focusing or relying on adults to deliver, be the delivery points for this, for our children, what are your thoughts on that? Because even, at Harvard, Center for Developing Child, all looking at what the child needs. Do we have an equal amount of conversation happening about how our adults would feed into this, given our current workforce? And how much effort would need to be put into that? And whether there is a reasonable expectation that anything would change among the adults who are going to be teachers, mentors, educators for these children?
I can respond to that in a couple of ways. I think one is that you're absolutely right. Adults who are working with children largely from adversity they come from their own circumstances of adversity. So you're right, a huge investment needs to be made around behavioral change in adults or transformative change in adults. Not just incremental formulas. Formulas will not work. If I go to a teacher today and say, do these 5 things in the classroom and you'll have a great classroom, it's going to fail. What I need to go back to the teacher and create an experience for the teacher is, what does it mean for you when you feel seen and heard? What does it mean for you when you are treated with dignity and respect? What does it mean for you when you are being creative? When teachers experience that and see the value in that for themselves, they will be more compelled to go back and take it into their learning environments. So it's really about investing in the teacher or an adult for the sake of the adult. And then using that to then create impact on the child, whether it's a teacher, educator, or parent. So that's one piece of how we need to invest. The second is more at the systemic level. I think, again, like I said, the teacher or educator is still one piece of the puzzle. But again, if you look around the room here, there are different people or organizations solving a different piece of the puzzle. Someone's solving school leadership, someone's solving state level education administration issues, someone's solving early childhood education pieces. So if you look at the entire spectrum, one is looking at age, so from say -1 to all the way to 2021. In that age spectrum, we need a whole host of interventions, but what we need is a shared understanding of the problem, which is beyond just the surface level, going deep in understanding challenges of brain development, of child adversity, and the impact of that. Also understanding the context of how the world is shifting and what skills kids need for an uncertain, complex future. So one is the age appropriateness of that and how each of our pieces of the puzzles come together there. Second is looking at learning ecosystems itself. Like, so the parent as a learning ecosystem, the community around the child as a learning ecosystem, the neighborhood as a learning ecosystem, looking at the school as an ecosystem, looking at the school administration as an ecosystem. So looking at policy making as an ecosystem, the foundations and funders as an ecosystem, how we are shifting the narratives in each of these pieces, and actually at a very honest level recognizing that one organization or one intervention is not going to solve this problem. We have to now increasingly start moving into more collective impact spaces. And it seems easy to say, but collaboration is extremely difficult. But we have to have those difficult conversations. We have to use our own set of life skills and go into collaborative spaces and have those conversations and create those collaborative spaces.
I think we really should take a step back and think about our purpose for why we're doing it. We're hoping that today is going to be the beginning of this conversation on rethinking education as well. Thank you very much for that.